Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Jim Ford. I work at Arcadis, and I also have the privilege of serving as the chairman of the board for SAMA. And on behalf of my fellow board of directors, it's my honor to facilitate our session this afternoon. And I'm really impressed by the slate that we have today. One of the things that's always kept me coming back to SAMA for the last decade is the very high consistency of the programming that we have. Whether it's the world-class, thought-provoking C-suite executives that headline our keynotes, or the some odd 100 sessions that we offer at AC that bring together the world's best practitioners, consultants, academics, and others in our SAMA community, there's always something for everyone. And based on the fact that there's 700 plus of you out there today, I would say that we're true to that form. But one of the greatest innovations that we've had as SAMA is this session, which we call the Next Exchange, which is SAMA's answer to the TED Talks, where we have a series of very short mini keynote topics on things that are relevant to the next generation of SAM. And so today we have three incredible speakers that hit the same topic from a slightly different perspective. Please join me in welcoming Francis Gouillard. Thanks, Francis.
Well, thank you. Well, good afternoon, everybody. So I spend my entire life halfway between academia and consulting. And one of the things that I did in my INSEAD days, used to teach at INSEAD in Europe, is I've gotten to know Cirque du Soleil as one of the cases that we wrote as part of the Blue Ocean Strategy case book there. And so that got me a chance to basically meet a few circus people. And the key rule that they have is, whatever you do, never follow the animal act. And I don't know why I'm reminded of this at this particular moment here. It was just one should never follow Jeff on a stage here. So we're going to switch a little bit of tone here. So because the way I got roped into doing this is it started with a kind invitation from Bernard Cancard to basically give my views of what are the major trends happening in the world of the SAM. I'm now old enough to have basically hung around, SAM teams for, the better part of probably 40 years, if the truth be told. And I've kind of witnessed a little bit this evolution. So the combination of, Nick Zimmerman and Libby and Bernard and so on asked me to write a chapter basically for the book that SAMA is putting together. And then after I had embarrassed myself by putting those predictions together, they figured that somehow doing a verbal rendition of this would be the logical consequence of this. So I was prudent enough not to have any slides, so I will not distribute any slides so that, I can go back on my predictions, but, So next year, I'll give you an updated version. It's going to be a little bit like, CNN calling the presidential election. This year, I'm going to make the prediction, and next year, I'll explain why, the prediction didn't work and the reality changed and rationalize that. So here's basically the 5 items I want to talk about. So again, I didn't put anything in writing, but my SAMA handlers were prudent enough to insist that I have a script because they've watched the president get into trouble for not following that too closely. So I will try not to digress too far. The first prediction is basically about the types of problems that SAMs will have to tackle over future years. And what I'm discovering, I think, is that there's a whole history of problems that SAMs have tackled, and I think it's going to be quite different in the future. The early SAMs, the birth of the SAM movement, if we go back even to, early 80s or early 90s, was the birth of the SAM came essentially with the advent of with the discovery that we could quantify operational problems. We could solve operational problems, and we could quantify the value associated with that. And today, I would say probably still 80% of the problems that we tackle as SAMs tend to be of the operational improvement category, improving our customers' operations, being able to quantify that, and justifying the sale of service or equipment on the basis of the ROI that it generates for the customer. So I think that's still true. I think what we've seen now more and more in the last 10 or 15 years is there's a slight shift, or a strong shift, I would say, towards the revenue generation side. So we are now more able to truly participate in the genesis of new products, the generation of new products. So there's a revenue business case that we are able to generate, and that's been the new phenomenon. The future, I think, is going to be much more about risk management. Each of us as a SAM is going to be in the risk management business. And a lot of the problems that I see my SAM colleagues tackle today are essentially big societal problems that involves risk management. More and more sales are very much built around sustainability. They're based around, big problems like transparency of value chains. It's built around health. It's built around world hunger, quite literally in some cases, transforming entire supply chains. A lot of these things are about these big mother problems, basically. And my encouragement to all of you is to wade into those waters, right? SAMs can be modest. Not all of them are modest, but SAMs can be very, very modest about that and define their universe as I'm going to save you money, or I may help you, grow slightly. My encouragement is to become essentially quasi-spiritual, right? Do tackle those big issues. These are, of course, government problems before they are business problems. But the size of those problems is very important, and you can make a contribution in them. So as long as you are going to act as a problem solver, as long as your equipment or your service is going to contribute to the solution of these types of problems, you might as well define those problems as big problems. And a lot of that is in the co-discovery phase of the process. It's starting early. If you enter narrowly, rather, you will come out of that, with a narrow assignment and a narrow solution. If you broaden that scope right away, start talking in terms of this broad sustainability, health, transparency, security types of issues, you're much more likely to get there. Now, I was reading recently, the annual report of a company that happens to make urinals, and it's probably harder for you to connect urinals, but you can to all these things. But you can connect urinals to sustainability and health and a variety of other things. You can always position what you do. It's probably harder to connect that to cybersecurity, I suppose, but you can try, right? And you're always better off, in essence, defining the problem very, very broadly. So that discovery is more and more important. It does remain the stepchild, largely, of the SAM process nowadays. That's still the most underinvested phase. And I think in the future, we will see that developing really more and more. The second prediction that I would make has to do with the fact is essentially ecosystem assembly. Is the SAM will increasingly become the orchestrator of not only the supplier that he or she represents traditionally and the customer, but there's going to be a whole ecosystem of people upstream of you if you are the supplier, downstream of your customer, and kind of sidestream. And you see that in a whole lot of industries, right? If you take a look at the pharma industry is much more sort of a collection of, big pharma and suppliers to big pharma. But this big pharma has typically a collection of smaller biotech companies that begin circling around. You have more and more small academic shops that basically develop things, not necessarily in pharma, but in all industries. You have a lot of, suppliers, small suppliers of various services that are associated with this. And the SAM is therefore not only interfacing with the customer system, but is basically a broker of a whole lot of talent upstream of your company. And very often, the procurement department is asking you to do that. We love to say that we as SAMs are sophisticated, we are seeking co-creation, we want to engage, and procurement will not let us. And if I look at it analytically today, I would say that procurement may be collectively ahead of us in the desire to invite that co-creation. And I hope I'm not shocking you with this statement here. I see the procurement function becoming more enlightened faster and faster. And in many cases, the SAMs are dragging behind to respond to that. And a lot of that comes from essentially this desire to create an ecosystem. Some of you may have been, for example, at some of the SAMA events in Europe last year, We had a case, for example, of the French company Air Liquide who was there, and they were describing a situation where a head of procurement in a food company, which is a good 5 steps downstream of them, right? Somebody who's making yogurt and products like that, and inviting Air Liquide, which is an air separation company. And the relevance of inviting that chain is that the air separation company was able to influence a complex manufacturing process where there were equipment people and device people and IT people in such a fashion that the end product, the food product, was in fact, had a competitive advantage. They had they had introduced a differentiation for that product. It's a very complex ecosystem to think about that. In this case, was the procurement side that basically had asked for that, and then the SAM from Air Liquide was responding to that. So as SAMs, you will have to do that more and more in the future. Through the randomness, I guess, of my academic and consulting life, basically attend a fair amount of quarterly business reviews. And I would say the major trend in quarterly business reviews is the advent of this kind of innovation back end. Right? Traditionally, the front end is always the operational side, and people try to reconcile the sales with what the other guy is purchasing, and the numbers never agree, as we know, and we discuss this forever, right? But the back end now is really more and more this innovation side, and this innovation side is increasingly all about introducing new players. There's more and more this desire of having the SAM become kind of the tier 1 innovator, right? Bring the resources not only of the supplier company, but all the resources around it. So that makes it very complex because there's a massive amount of coaching that you need to do to these guys as well. Third trend, or let me mention one thing as well on ecosystem out there. So some of you may have heard the term blockchain. As long as what my role is to be about the future, what I think you will see is you'll see over the next 2 years the word blockchain enter your vocabulary if it hasn't already. Blockchain, as you may know, is basically an IT system, right? In the simplest form of it, it's basically a way of building the accounting for an entire ecosystem. Traditionally, there hasn't been a system that allows companies to essentially create new forms of transactions between themselves. Our entire accounting system, IT system, is predicated on the notion that there are boundaries for the suppliers, boundaries for the customer, and we build links like EDI and so on. Blockchain is the technology behind Bitcoin, so probably some of you know that for supplying illegal substances and paying with Bitcoins with this. But Bitcoin is also, blockchain is also the technology that allows you to essentially create this umbilical cord that connects all the members of an ecosystem. So whenever you have an integrated process, and by definition, if you have a supplier, customer, and a whole ecosystem, you have a lot of those interrelationships. Blockchain is a big technology breakthrough that is transforming most industries. At this point, started with financial systems and it's going to follow other things. So very much like many of you are involved into Internet of Things types of approaches right now, blockchain is the next wave coming there. So, if you are interested in reading about this, start with the Wikipedia definition of blockchain and work your way through that. My prediction is it will influence your life quite dramatically in the not too distant future. Third prediction quickly has to do with essentially the human chain that the SAM has to orchestrate. Traditionally, the SAM had a fairly simple life, which is worried about the supplier system, right? A procurement person, often a lot of technical people, and then trying to penetrate within that supplier. Most SAMs now have literally hundreds of people they are supposed to stay in touch with, both within their own company and ecosystem, as well as on the supplier, as well as on the customer side. So that's a very difficult thing to do, right? Because you are trying to reach really way down there. Since I don't know why Circus is on my mind somehow, there's a quote out there which says that what the SAM has to do is very much like trying to manage the circus from the monkey cage. I don't know if you remember that quote. It was a quote that came in the early 20th century. Somebody said you have so little control of this, right? So you're trying to orchestrate this whole circus, and you yourself have basically your perimeter of responsibility, which is very limited. You have to do this increasingly with an increasingly long chain of people. Those hundreds of people, occasionally thousands of people. Traditionally, when I started, in essence, in the SAM world, everything was basically basically direct interaction. The early SAMs, if you go back to even the late 70s or the early 80s, they were not managing projects all over the world. It was kind of a rolling fire. You know, I learned my trade working largely with people at Capgemini, and you know, when they were going to DuPont plants trying to improve productivity and others, it was kind of a live interaction, right? We were in Circleville, Ohio, and worked, you know, shoulder to shoulder with people, and the SAM was a keeper, basically, of that process. And then over time, we discovered that globalization occurred. We discovered that people wanted the speed of transformation to be much larger. So all of a sudden, the traditional SAM could not be there every single time. You know, in the early stages, if I reminisce completely about this, the presentation were not even slides, you know, just at that point, Capgemini was using literally hand-drawn charts that were presented inside a little briefcase, and that created a very intimate, live relationship, right? Of course, the SAMs nowadays, most of you who are SAMs in here do not have that luxury anymore. You typically sit at headquarters, occasionally close to the customer, and then you are trying to orchestrate the work of very, very large teams. So your work becomes much more virtual as a result of that. You cannot, you know, inject that emotional component quite as much. By the way, I never thought that Jeff was the most entertaining introduction to Aristotelian philosophy that I've had. Remember my high school classes, and they were nowhere near as funny as this. So that emotional component, right, the pathos component, as he called it here, the pathos component is very, very hard to dispatch nowadays because you are intermediated by systems, by teleconferences. You cannot be there. So my prediction is really, you know, the hard part of this is to find a way of injecting that into people. So what I think is going to happen, and I know Sama is very, very interested in this, what we will see developing in the future years is a high density network of coaching relationships, which will require some technology. The role of the SAM has moved from leading on the field to essentially coaching from behind through the sheer necessity of having this very large network of people. So we don't have the tools that do that today very well. We have CRM tools, so we know how to track pipelines and conversions and these things. But the future is going to be in the ability to inject knowledge, coaching in particular, from the center on the part of the SAM to all these people. So that's, you know, what Valkyrie and a few other people are trying to do in the periphery of Sama here, in the inner sanctum of Sama, and that is very much where I think the frontier is in the state of the art here. It's just going to be this ability to coach on a large scale, and I don't think we have cracked that quite yet, but we are well on our way there. The fourth trend here, try to stay a little bit within my time contract here, has to do with the role of data, not surprisingly, right? So data is everything. Somebody was quoting this morning, I think it was the AMD healthcare person, saying data is the new bacon, which I thought was a pretty humorous way of framing the issue here. So data is obviously everywhere, right? We know that data is more and more the day-to-day bread and butter, I guess, to stay with the food metaphor of the SAM. The clearest manifestation of that, and what I think will continue, is really the Internet of Things, right? So we know that all the equipment and services that you guys have or sell now have sensors in them. There's probably a sensor underneath the chair in which, you know, most of you are seated right now that is sending some information back to Gaylord Hotel saying that there are way too many chairs in here and so many of them are unoccupied and therefore they should reduce their capital expenditure budget and get rid of some of those chairs. And you have this constant optimization. There's probably somebody who's sending a message to your mother saying your posture is actually very bad on that chair as well, and probably offering a class by the Potomac at 5 p.m. that will take care of this scoliosis of yours or something. So there's a lot of information that is captured directly at the point of utilization, right? That is fed to the cloud. That's basically the essence of this Internet of Things, right? There's a sensor that basically has a little gateway that sends the information to the cloud. Somebody grinds the data in the cloud, either some automatic algorithms or, you know, somebody is trying to generate insights from that. And that is fed back to the SAM. In the ideal scenario, it's fed back to the SAM that can utilize that data at the next quarterly daily business reviews or in some appropriate sales interaction to essentially pinpoint an operational improvement opportunity or some kind of opportunity for the company. That's the theory of Internet of Things. What I would say is, if I take a snapshot today of really the use of Internet of Things, many of you have this capability at the R&D stage, right? So they are wonderful systems. You know, one that always comes to mind that people often quote in here is, you know, SKF in ball bearings does that very well. You have an intelligence of the little ball bearing that captures, you know, the heat and the temperature and whether that thing is vibrating correctly or not vibrating when it shouldn't. And then you can use that for preventive maintenance purposes. DHL is doing that with maintenance on demand as well, working with Volvo and Lexus and other people. There's, you know, numerous applications of Internet of Things. John Deere is doing that, for example. John Deere has the ability on their construction business as well as on their agricultural business, but on the construction side, they are able to basically see the productivity of a site. They know whether the machines are left idle when they should be turned off. They know whether people are attacking, you know, that particular pile of gravel with the wrong intensity, too much intensity. The reality of that is the SAMs today utilize that data very little. I would say, you know, the capabilities are utilized for about 5% of what they are. For all the hype associated with this, very few SAMs know how to construct or have the ability to tap into a group that truly generates insights about this. So my prediction is that in the future, that data will become much more real. What I think we are beginning to see is we are seeing little analytical groups that are inserted inside the business development cycle, working in partnership with the SAMs, and they do the grinding of the numbers, right? So what we are seeing more and more is the emergence of essentially two in a box, where there is the SAM who remains basically the person who is the keeper of the business development process, and behind him or her is a more consulting, analytically oriented person, typically a little younger, typically not as good at figuring out, in essence, the network of interactions, but the two of them become kind of a team. Xerox has a kind of a team that does that, you know, assess and optimize to a degree. Becton Dickinson in healthcare is doing that as well now with their signature solutions offering people who blitz a hospital and instead of simply selling, you know, needles and sharps, basically figures out how to prevent infectious disease problems, you know, people who basically end up hurting themselves with needle sticks and so on. So on data, my prediction is that we will see the emergence of these more analytical groups. They are more like SWAT teams that come at the front end. The business development person will maintain the relationship in the long run. There'll be sporadic interjections, basically, of stuff there. Finally, the last prediction I would make has to do with the change of business models that the SAMs will have to make. The SAM plays an increasingly larger role in innovation. Historically, SAMs have not thought of themselves at all as being part of innovation. R&D did innovation, and then the SAMs sold whatever R&D and manufacturing were able to deliver. It is less and less true. Even if you look at it from a purely academic standpoint, 70% of the new products and new services, as tabulated by, you know, somebody like Eric von Hippel at MIT and others, comes at the point of intersection with the customer. That's not true everywhere. You know, the new pharmaceutical molecules continue to come from the lab rather than coming at the point of intersection with the customer. But in most industries, and collectively across the board, 70% of innovation comes from customers and typically sales team led by the SAM bending the use of the existing products and services in such a fashion that it kind of naturally degenerates into a new offering, right? So in many ways, innovation is a byproduct of the sales process. In effect, in the service offering, you are what you sell. It's the morphing of what you sell that to a large degree starts driving innovation. So we find this to be very, very present as a trend. It already exists today. You see more and more of that happening. And in the future, I think we will see even more of that. So as SAMs, for the SAMs among you, you have a major role to play in innovation. Obviously, that requires a complex partnership with R&D or service development, because service development still will have the technical resources and the engineering know-how and so on that you will need. But the partnership between you as the lead contact person and them is going to be a very important component of this. You can see that in a variety of ways. The innovation becomes live more and more. There are more and more customer innovation centers. You know, people may have seen DHL. I think they've spoken at SAMA about what they have out there. You see other places where they are half kind of entertainment center or traditional showrooms, I would say, and half are and half lab, half technical resource with real scientists. And the SAMs typically bring the customers there, create an interaction with the technical staff, and they generate projects, or even in some cases outright prototypes, right live there. So that is, in effect, the role of the SAM in innovation. So in the next 5 or 10 years, the prediction is really the SAM will play a greater and greater role. That has already been true at the SAMA conferences ever since I have attended them, to see that innovation is more and more on the agenda, in addition to the more traditional negotiation, selling, value quantification, and so on. So you're going to see more and more of that moving forward. So that's in summary what I wanted to share with you. 5 trends are, there's going to be more and more, the problems you're going to deal with are going to be bigger and more oriented towards risk management. You're going to be dealing more and more with ecosystems, and we'll have to become ecosystem assemblers. You will be dealing with more and more remote coaching. The human chain you will have to energize and make vibrant is going to become longer and longer. Data, IoT, and other things is going to become much more important than you have. And then eventually you will have to play more and more of a role in innovation and drive the creation of new business models. So that's what I wanted to share with you this afternoon. So thank you very much for the opportunity to address you guys.